I need you to understand this. Getting defense tech from investment to deployment is very hard. If you're building an AI app or a social network, it's a different story. But defense tech is very hard. So we assembled a panel of 3 industry veterans to talk about how to improve that and with the steps they're taking to make it easier to deploy this capital. We have Ryan Benitez, NATO Diana's Chief Commercial Officer, John Riggs, the Chief Adoption Officer of NIF, and Jennifer Nelson, the Executive Vice President of In-Q-Tel International. Leading this conversation is Leslie Hitchcock of Resilience Media. Bring them on out with a big round of applause.
Good morning. Thank you all for being with me today. So we had a really lively prep call about this topic. We all feel very passionately about helping startups succeed, which doesn't really seem like it should be that revolutionary, and yet it is. So John, Chief Adoption Officer, Ryan, new in your role as Chief Commercial Officer, and Jen at IQT. Let's start with you because IQT celebrated its 25th anniversary last year, and adoption has been part of your mandate.
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit about how that has shaped how IQT works with startups?
Absolutely. So as you mentioned, now 26 years old, In-Q-Tel has always been focused on bringing the capability from the emerging tech ecosystem and the amazing startups to start the US government. That's not an easy exercise, and I think one thing that we've learned over the years of that time is that presence and that conversation around the adoption of the technology, and so not just creating this sort of innovation theater, right, with the conversation around technology into the government, but actually taking that technology and getting it into the hands of the users, finding the first government customer, and doing that along the way. We have done that since inception. I've personally been at In-Q-Tel for almost 17 years, and I'd say we've doubled down on it. And so we've built teams of people around this challenge of understanding end customers, their problem sets, and how to actually work with the startups to bridge that gap and to translate what's going on. And I could spend hours talking about it, and I think we'll get into sort of the investor view of things, but it's fundamental to everything we do.
And John and Ryan, so y'all are now, you're at NIF and NATO Diana, which are relatively new organizations. Now, I mean, in startup land, 3 years is actually kind of, is established, I guess. But you were brought on specifically to be in your role, and you both originated the role. Ryan, can you talk about your background at Decisive Point?
Sure.
Yes, and how that led you to NATO Diana?
Sure, absolutely. So NATO Diana is the Defense Innovation Accelerator of the North Atlantic. It is an accelerator to find the best technologies across the alliance. I've been in the role for 3 months now as Chief Commercial Officer. Prior to that, I came out of 5 years in venture capital at Decisive Point, an early stage VC firm that also had an adoption arm similar to In-Q-Tel and the NIF. Now it's flip side. So now I'm in a government organization working on commercial. And I think that's what made it appealing to bring someone in from the venture capital community. And one of the mandates that we have at NATO Diana is to build out a trusted network of investors that are ready and willing to invest in all of the companies coming out of Diana. We're up to almost 300 companies this year, and that's a lot. And so we have to be able to attack that at scale. So bringing that VC lens onto what we do so that our companies can grow even beyond the program as they progress.
And John, at NIF, you originated the role as Chief Adoption Officer. I think you've been there a year now. In your experience with the MOD, how is that shaping how you work with the startups that NIF backs?
So prior to joining the NIF, I was the Innovation Director in MOD. I think it's worth, and Torsten, I thought, put it brilliantly yesterday, where he said, in most markets, if you get product market fit, that's it. The kind of magic's done. Sit back, watch the money roll in. That is not the same when you're selling into government, and certainly not the same when you're selling into defence. There are complicated acquisition pathways, and you often find that the kind of separation between your end user and the person who's buying it. So you have kind of end user, person who sets a requirement, you then have commercial people, you have people who do the money. So you've got this really convoluted chain that you need to navigate. And it takes time and it takes effort. So when the NIF was being built, they recognized that this is a difficult challenge. So you don't just assume it's going to happen. So you establish a team. I now run a thing called the Mission Platform Group, which brings together 3 functions. Principally in those is adoption, and exactly as you were saying, this is about how do you get the technology from the startup into the hands of the end user. So that's the first bit. The second is then protect. So we help them understand cyber vulnerabilities, we help them understand trusted capital, how to keep their cap tables clean, and then the third bit is on responsible use. So those kind of 3 elements working hand in glove, that's the support we provide to the portfolio companies. And we think that's a kind of unique offering. There's no other deep tech dual use fund, the scale that we are, that's able to offer all that support to the portfolio companies. Just one final bit though, the other bit which I didn't really appreciate until I got into the job, there's a kind of obvious business to government avenue of finding acquisition organisations inside MODs, but a huge chunk of our work is also working alongside defence primes, whether they're the traditional primes or the neo primes, however you want to describe them. But that's a super important route for many of our companies who are producing subsystems or they're doing manufacturing techniques. So we're obviously working those kind of routes in parallel.
Right. We were on a panel at London Tech Week where one of the startups said working with MOD is like walking up to a door that has 50 doorbells on it and you don't know which one to push. So, it's obviously a completely different animal. So, I'd love to hear an exchange from y'all on this, but do you think that this role is the beginning of a permanent shift in how funds and other organizations operate, but by being able to support their startups?
Sure, I'll start first. So speaking from the government side, so Diana is a NATO body, and I think we've seen a couple of groups across various governments and MODs start to build out what is called a commercial engagement team or the CCO role. The Defense Innovation Unit has a very commercial-facing presence as well, and that's because it's absolutely necessary for emerging dual-use technologies to be able to have that access. So, well, I think NATO has been extremely forward-leaning in, number 1, standing up Diana, and then number 2, ensuring that, okay, we've got all of these sensitive technologies. They need access to trusted capital. They can't be sitting ducks. That takes engagement and open discussion with the investor community, and then also with trusted industry partners like defense primes. So absolutely, I think we're going to see more and more from the government side saying, hey, we need to be thinking about having a commercial lens and supporting the emerging technologies that we're working with, because government can't do it alone.
So if I can jump in, do primes understand startup technology and how it can be used in your experience in these roles?
I think they genuinely, well, it varies. Not all primes are created equal.
Right.
I think a lot of them genuinely do understand the value that comes out of startups. I think some of them find it difficult. I mean, they are a mirror image of the organizations which acquire from them. So the very large traditional primes look very like large ministries of defense. They're very bureaucratic, they're very slow moving. So in the same way that MODs have a challenge of working with these fast startups who are expecting things to happen super, super quickly, that they want to do rapid iteration, they need their contract signed very quickly, I think the primes often struggle with that as well. And we sometimes see, frustratingly, very, very good startups who engage with primes, and rather than the primes being kind of brought up to the tempo of the startup, the opposite happens, and you find that they're kind of dragged down because of the kind of bureaucratic. That is not true of all the primes, and I think what's really interesting here is the relationships we're starting to see inside the NIF, for instance, with ARX Robotics and Helsing. So we're seeing partnering of smaller startups and these kind of neo-primes who I think instinctively want to act more quickly, and I think that's a really interesting dynamic.
And, oh yeah, please.
I actually was going to say, if you don't mind, I'm going to jump back to Ryan's point and sort of tie in the integrator piece as well, because I think there's an and to everything that Ryan said. Yes, absolutely. Startups, investors, the entire ecosystem needs to understand the problem set what is going on, the importance of it. But I do believe there's a level deeper of adoption support that is necessary, and I'm not convinced that's required of every investor, right? And that's what the ecosystem is for. That is what the trusted relationship amongst investors is for, so that you are not spending the time, the people, like the heavy energy to follow the individual programs and advise these startups on, is that worth your time or is that worth your time, right? The beauty in everybody getting involved in the ecosystem is that there's a ton of opportunity. The challenge with that is it comes with all the complexity of the 50 doors that you referenced, right? And so which one is a project opportunity versus a growth market opportunity? And how are you understanding that? So many of the government entities and the defense-focused VCs and others that are coming in the space, they're new, right? What is really worth the time of that startup? And I think that should be a decision amongst the founders and the investors to understand. And I don't believe every investor in the room has to track it as closely. They have to have the co-investors that they trust doing that. And I think that's where the NIF can come in, that's where In-Q-Tel can come in, and others, right? There's more space than just that, but I don't think it needs to be at the level of depth for everybody.
I totally agree. And I think there's a really interesting dynamic that develops here, and this is a conversation we've had with a number of the startups. Different funds not only bring capital, but they bring different other value to bear. So for us, it's a mission platform group. If you get one of the larger VC funds, you have the potential of then slipping into their growth funds. We're obviously early stage, but some of them will lead you into a growth fund. If you can get a CVC, someone like Lockheed Martin or some of the other CVCs out there, they're going to help with your integration into the platforms. They have amazing supply chain links as well. So what you want as a startup is to have a balance on your cap table of different funds who are bringing different value to the startup. That's super powerful, and we shouldn't all be trying to do each other's business.
That's great. It's about diversification. So let's shift a little bit. It's kind of a stressful week in NATO last couple of weeks, or in Europe with with Russian provocation happening pretty regularly now. In our prep call, we talked about what does adoption look like in wartime, and you're all set up through government entities who are I'm certain that you're considering this. Can we talk a little bit about how that shifts in how your work approaches it?
I mean, I think for us, it's all in the eye of the beholder, right? Whether you're at war or not. But there clearly is a sense of urgency right now, especially as we've seen the border incursions. And I think, how does that translate to what we're doing? I think, number one, it's how we operate at Diana and our ability to rapidly spin up something off cycle, right? Very quickly. So number one, it's about the way that we operate as an innovative agency. Number two, it's making sure that we're in lockstep with those on the front line, on the Eastern Front, about what the real problem sets are. And we heard some of those problems yesterday from our Ukrainian colleagues that were here. So lockstep there. And then number three, you mentioned innovation theater, right? Great, we're all going to get together. We're here at Resilience. We're doing demos. But let's rapidly stand up the experimentation and get the feedback loop going with the end users. That takes money, it takes buy-in, it takes building consensus. And I think we're getting there. We do a lot of operational exercises at NATO Diana, but we need to spin up more ways to do that faster, right? A 2-day experiment, let's get the end user feedback, rather than a year-long, planning for a military exercise. Those are important too. So that's kind of how I see it right now. And would love to hear your guys' ideas on some of that too.
Yeah, I mean, we're the furthest from the real threat, right? So looking from that outside lens, urgency absolutely redefines process. You just think differently in those times. You respond differently. You take different risks. You magically get rid of some of the red tape, right? And so I think it's about how do you bring that urgency throughout peacetime, throughout any position, to really push forward. And I think as an organization, just like Ryan said, it's about adapting. We can't be the last one to be getting the tech there and iterating on it and acting on it. So, right, it's picking up the pace of everyone to say, okay, well, here's more options on the table. Here's the ability to quickly test it. Restructuring how we work with the startups in our development work that we do with them to ensure that we're getting the current commercial version of the product, and then every iteration we're getting to the field as fast as possible, right? So we're not waiting the 18 months or whatever it may be.
So we can do this. This is what's so frustrating. So as a counter ID, was heavily involved in counter ID in Afghanistan, and we were able to find, from discovering a new threat through to deploying brand new capabilities, some of which had kind of started almost in labs and were being built at a pace, we were doing in months. So we were absolutely able to do it. The trick, and I was out in Lviv a couple of weeks ago, and we did a panel with some of their end users around how does industry interact with you? And the key thing is you need to be close together. So you need the technologist and the person doing the supply next to the end user so you can do this rapid iteration. The problem is in peacetime, we kind of take those two kind of warfighter and technologist and we drag them further and further apart and put lots of well-meaning people in the gap in between, kind of commercial and program management and all these other stuff. And the two drift further and further apart. And funny old thing, that adds delay, but it also means that the solutions diverge from what's required at the front side. We can absolutely do this, but it means that you need to rethink how you're doing your acquisition. And critically, and this is the bit which I don't think has come up a huge amount in the discussion so far for the last couple of days, it's about how you program your money. And one of the real challenges for all MODs is the system is configured to do long-term planning and try and specify down to the nth degree how you're going to spend every penny of this budget, and all the incentives are there to commit as soon as you can, because if you don't commit it, then someone comes and takes it away when there's an overspend. So if you don't have uncommitted money in your program, you cannot afford to do proper innovation. You can do lots of innovation theatre, but you cannot afford to do proper innovation because it needs the money, whether it's in the program, in the portfolio, or in the project. It doesn't matter which of those. It needs uncommitted money, which you can then say, this new thing has come along, and I'm going to put it against it. Until we, and all NATO nations are in that bucket, have a way of carving out that space for the uncommitted money, we are not going to be able to exploit these technologies at the pace we need to.
Jen, you're nodding vigorously, and Ryan, please.
Yeah, and I think if you could get the funding together, the budget line items, the streamlined acquisition, there's a lot of startups here at the conference today, and the founders are scrappy. If we give them the problem set, they will figure it out. They will find what platform they need to partner with to get it done. And we've just got to move faster about getting the acquisition pathways together, the funding together. But I really think, flipping it on its head, the founders, if we get the problem sets out to them, they're going to tackle it. They're going to go after it faster than maybe some of our own capability planners would. So I just wanted to drop that in there, since we have a lot of founders in the audience.
Yeah. I was just going to add, I think it's both in wartime, but sort of the structural conversation that John was just alluding to is also just generally with smaller governments. So you look at where there's quicker sort of tech on target and getting it out. It's the places that don't have the layers of compliance that exist on a daily basis. And so whether you're looking at sort of Estonia, we had some good conversations at dinner last night, but when you're looking at what the priorities of the current government are, but then the system that's around it, you have to optimize that system.
Can you speak to some governments that are doing it well?
You're the.
I suppose
you speak to the NATO countries.
if I was going to generalise, I think where you've got the adoption ripe nations at the moment are the ones who've got increasing defence expenditure, but do not have very well established defence industrial bases. Because the ones that got very well established defence industrial bases tend to have this kind of learnt behaviour between government and industry, which has created all these perverse things around how you plan money, how you do acquisition on a super transactional, zero trust basis. So those countries tend to be harder. Frustratingly, the UK is one of those, but the countries who don't have that challenge, but also have defence expenditure, and into there I would put countries like the Netherlands, I think the Nordics, those are, Estonia was mentioned already, I think those are the ones that feel instinctively like they get it and they've got the processes in place to help it move more quickly.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the Netherlands, we've seen some great success stories out of Diana and the Nordics and Estonia as well. One thing that that Diana has, it's called the Rapid Adoption Service, and it lines up with the Rapid Adoption Action Plan. But what it does is it allows any nation within NATO, especially those that maybe have less or more convoluted acquisition processes, to leverage Diana for that prototyping acquisition. So I think this is an entire new construct that's only several months old,
It
right?
launched in June.
So we can have multiple nations come through Diana to leverage, okay, we want to see this prototyping effort, we're looking for this specific capability, we can source from the Diana portfolio and make that happen very quickly. So in addition to many of the nations acting on their own, which is wonderful, and some of them have gone outside of the box, we also have this new mechanism to bring multiple nations together for rapid adoption.
And multiple nations together, but then also modular approaches with startups and bringing them together. Can you talk about that modular approach and iteration a little bit?
Sure. I mean, I think some of the panels yesterday touched on sort of the now integral nature of having a modular approach. It's something that even our investment theses at In-Q-Tel has always been, well, at least for my time there, wasn't quite the first 10 years, but has been based around this architectural approach to investment. And so it's not that we're always looking for that full solution. That one is much harder for a startup to develop, too much more challenging for a government to actually adopt, right? Because you're subbing in and out whole systems. But when you have a modular component-based, both architecture, sort of a deployment architecture, you can easily sub in and out those technologies that then will impact whether you need this type of sensor in this environment versus this one over here. And the time to iteration just shrinks dramatically when you're sort of strategically building that into the model versus sort of looking at technology as a standalone unit that's going to go solve a problem.
I think the other thing that's unique about both of your roles, right, In-Q-Tel, you guys usually have on the front end a program. You're going in very intentional with your investments, right? You know you've got a government sponsor or partner that's going to kind of pull that through. And I think you, John, too, in your role, right, you have eyes on with with the NATO partners across the nations, and so that helps NIF be very intentional with the investments it's making. And it just kind of circles back to the importance of this adoption role within private capital, and the NIF and In-Q-Tel are very unique models in that sense.
Yeah, and we're working. It was another thing in the Rapid Adoption Action Plan was this idea of a demand signal. So it was slightly frustrating for me to turn up into the job and find that there wasn't a sort of shopping list from NATO of saying, hey, here are the things we really need you to go and do. So we're getting closer to that, and NATO headquarters has undertaken to pull together a consolidated demand signal. What that allows us to do is then go out and hunt the best out there in the market and then invest in it and then give them the adoption support. And that bit around integration, we're seeing, even at 13 direct investments, we're seeing some really interesting interplay across our portfolio. So, for example, a recent exercise run by Land Command, NATO Land Command, three of our portfolio companies went out there together and were collaborating around how they would do the Eastern Flank Deterrence Line, which was mentioned yesterday. So that's a kind of internal collaboration, sort of systems type integration. We're also seeing bits of our portfolio, for example, ICOMAT is a carbon fiber composites company. They're now working with some of our other startups to say, hey, we could help you with your manufacturing process. So we're seeing that side of the sort of collaboration across. And crucially, as I mentioned earlier, into some of the defense primes as well. So we're seeing that modularity. And as you say, it's kind of standard now. You'd be nuts to go out and build something like an uncrewed system in any domain and not make it modular, because you know that your sensor is going to change. You know that different payloads are going to be required. So it's got to be kind of baked in from the outset.
Any last words to add on why we need to really bring this to the forefront of how startups get integrated with their customers?
For me, it's just, I'm always staggered when you go out and talk to the startups. The imagination, the creativity, the kind of energy, the determination, and it's super frustrating when it's then stuck because you've proved it works. You've got end users who love it, who say this is going to make my mission so much easier to deliver, and yet it's stuck. So somehow navigating through that, because frankly, it does not count until it's adopted.
Yeah, I would just say startups are a crucial part of the national security apparatus, but they need support and they need to be advised in a way that ultimately works for what they're looking to accomplish, as well as the investors who have put money into those startups. So we can't expect them to know how to do it all, and we need to support them along the way.
I think coming from the venture capital community back into government to NATO, I always have eyes on who's placing their cards where, because I do think the VC community is very good at recognizing patterns of, at the early stage especially, the team's ability to execute. So always, we have eyes on where the VCs are placing their cards. Vice versa, we want to make sure that we're communicating how we can de-risk some of these investments for them along the way. And so I think from an adoption standpoint, it's a two-way streak. It's absolutely crucial. And it's not something that maybe existed 10 years ago,
Right.
but now it's here. And I think we're going to continue to see more examples of it.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.